The wind howled a mournful tune across the dry Oklahoma plains, carrying with it the fine red dust that coated everything. It was the kind of dust that seeped into your bones, a constant reminder of the land's broken promise. For 6-year-old Lily, it was the taste of her life. She stood by the side of the long dirt road, her small hand gripping the handle of a rusty, dented tin pail. Her brother Thomas was hunched over, his face pale and thin, coughing into the crook of his arm. He was only 4, but he looked like a shriveled old man. His clothes, once a decent shade of blue, were now a tattered, dust-caked grey. "Lily," he whispered, his voice raspy, "I'm hungry." Lily's heart ached. She'd heard those words 100 times in the last month, and each time they were a dagger to her soul. She looked down at the empty pail. Her mother had sent them out that morning with the promise that someone, anyone, might spare a bit of food. But the road was quiet, a lonely ribbon stretching into a desolate horizon. The few families they had passed were as desperate as they were, their faces etched with the same hunger and despair. The air was thick with it, a tangible weight that pressed down on every soul, struggling to survive the dust bowl. A cloud of dust on the horizon signaled an approaching vehicle. Lily squinted, hope flickering in her chest. As the shape grew closer, she could make out the silhouette of a truck, a sturdy Ford model, its engine rumbling with a steady, powerful rhythm that was a stark contrast to the silence of the land. The truck was well maintained, a sign of prosperity in a world that had forgotten what the word meant. The vehicle slowed as it approached, kicking up a final large cloud of dust that enveloped the 2 children. The driver, a man with a weathered face and a gaze that seemed to hold the weight of the world, leaned out of the window. His eyes, a striking blue, scanned the children with a practiced weariness. He had seen this sight countless times. Families broken by the drought and the economic depression. "You kids all right?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Lily took a tentative step forward. "Mister," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "please, just feed my brother." She held up the empty pail, the gesture more eloquent than any plea. "He's sick, he needs food." The man's gaze softened. He looked at Thomas, whose small body was trembling, his eyes half closed. The boy's weakness was palpable. The man's eyes flickered to the empty pail, then back to Lily's tear-filled eyes. He didn't ask about their parents. He didn't need to. He had seen the way the hunger hollowed out a person, the way it stripped away dignity and replaced it with a desperate need for survival. He nodded slowly and reached for something on the passenger seat. He pulled out a burlap sack and a canteen. "Here," he said, handing the sack to Lily. "There's some bread and dried meat in there, and water. Get some water into him first." Lily's hands trembled as she took the sack. It was heavy, and the weight felt like a miracle. She fumbled with the string, her fingers clumsy with exhaustion and excitement. Thomas, his eyes now open, stared at the sack with a mixture of disbelief and frantic hope. "Thank you, mister," Lily whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you so much." The man nodded again. "My name's Jesse," he said. "Jesse Callahan. I'm a rancher a few miles west of here. We've got a bit of land that's holding on, and a few cattle left. You two be careful." With that, he put the truck in gear and drove off, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Lily knelt down beside Thomas, her hands shaking as she pulled out a piece of hard, crusty bread and a strip of jerky. She broke off a small piece of bread and dipped it in the water from the canteen, then held it to Thomas's lips. He ate it slowly, his eyes wide and grateful. As he ate, a wave of dizziness washed over him. Lily knew what it was. Hunger. He'd barely eaten in days. She watched as his small body finally gave in to exhaustion, his head lolling to the side. He was safe now, for a little while. With the food in their hands, the world seemed to hold a flicker of hope. But the road was long, and their parents were still a long way from home. The dust swirled around them, a perpetual monument to their struggle, but for the first time in a long time, Lily felt like they had a fighting chance. The sun was a searing orb in the sky by the time they reached Jesse Callahan's ranch. The dust on the road had become so thick it felt like walking through a fog. The meager meal had given Thomas a burst of energy, but it was quickly fading. Lily carried the burlap sack, its weight a comforting, though heavy, presence on her shoulder. The landscape was desolate, a study in browns and greys, with only the occasional skeletal remains of a tree to break the monotony. Then they saw it, a cluster of buildings on a small rise, surrounded by a wire fence. The site was a beacon in the wasteland. It was a proper ranch, not just a shack on a patch of dirt. There was a main house, a barn, a well with a working windmill, and a small corral with a few gaunt-looking but healthy cows. The sound of the windmill creaking in the wind was a melody of life. Lily held Thomas's hand tightly. "Look, Thomas," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "That's where the man lives." Dim. A man, Jesse, emerged from the barn, a bucket in his hand. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his movements economical and strong. He saw the two small figures approaching and stopped, his expression unreadable. Lily's heart pounded. She hadn't expected them to be so close. She wasn't sure what to do now. She had planned to thank him and move on, but the sight of the well and the green patch of grass by the house was too tempting to ignore. As they got closer, Jesse set the bucket down and walked to the fence. "You two a long way from home," he said, his voice a quiet question. "Yes, sir," Lily said, her voice wavering. "We're going to my grandma's farm, but it's a long way off." She didn't want to admit that her parents were gone, having left to find work, leaving them to a kind of independence that was too heavy for their young shoulders. Jesse's eyes, those piercing blue eyes, seemed to see right through her. He looked at Thomas, who was now leaning heavily against Lily, his face flushed. "He doesn't look so good," Jesse said. "He's just tired," Lily lied, though she knew it was more than that. He was weak. The food had helped, but he needed more than a single meal. Jesse didn't press her. Instead, he opened the gate. "Come on in," he said simply. "You can rest here for a bit. There's water and a cool place to sit." Lily hesitated. She had been taught not to trust strangers. But this man, this Jesse Callahan, had already shown them kindness. And besides, where else could they go? The sun was setting, and the temperature was dropping, and Thomas needed a place to rest. She led Thomas through the gate. They followed Jesse into the small house. The air inside was cool and smelled of wood smoke and a faint, comforting scent of cooking. It was a simple, rustic home with a fireplace in the center, a small kitchen area, and 2 beds covered with quilts. "Sit," Jesse said, motioning to a small table. He went to the kitchen and returned with a bowl of thick stew and a glass of milk. "Eat." Lily's stomach rumbled. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. She ate slowly, savoring every spoonful. The stew was rich and flavorful, and the milk was cold and refreshing. Thomas, who had been lying on one of the beds, perked up at the smell of food and managed to eat a few spoonfuls himself. Jesse sat across from them, watching them with an expression of quiet contemplation. He didn't speak, just let them eat in peace. When they were finished, he took the dishes and washed them in a large basin. "You two can stay the night," he said, without turning around. "It's too dangerous for you to be out there in the dark." "Thank you, sir," Lily said, her voice filled with a gratitude she could not fully express. Jesse nodded. "Just Jesse," he said. He looked at Thomas, whose eyes were now closed, his breathing more even. "He's going to be all right," he said. "He just needs some rest and a bit of food. You both do." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of empathy that Lily had not expected. She looked around the small house, at the clean floors, the neat, well-made beds, and she felt a sense of peace settle over her that she hadn't felt in a very long time. For the first time since their journey began, she felt like they were safe. The following morning, Lily woke to the sound of sizzling bacon and the smell of coffee. The sun was streaming through the window, and the room was filled with a soft, golden light. Thomas was still asleep in the bed next to her, his breathing steady. He looked a little healthier, his cheeks less sallow. Jesse was at the stove, flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He wore a simple plaid shirt and worn denim overalls. He looked up when Lily stirred. "Morning," he said, his voice as low and quiet as ever. "Breakfast is almost ready." Lily sat up, stretching her tired muscles. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. "Didn't have to, but I wanted to," he said, a hint of a smile on his face. "It's not often I get to cook for more than one." They ate in silence, the quiet only broken by the clinking of forks on plates. When they were finished, Jesse looked at Lily, his gaze gentle but serious. "So," he said, "you going to tell me what's really going on? Where are your parents?" Lily hesitated. The lie was so familiar, but the truth felt like a heavy stone in her throat. They went to California to find work," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "They said they'd send for us when they could. They gave us food and told us to walk to my grandma's farm." The story was a half-truth. Her parents had gone to California, but they had left her and Thomas with a neighbor who had, in turn, become too destitute to care for them. Jesse listened without interruption. "And you don't know when they're coming back?" he asked. "No, sir," she said, her head bowed. They said it could be a long time." Jesse leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He looked out the window at the endless brown landscape. "I see," he said. He was silent for a long moment, and Lily's heart pounded with anxiety. Was he going to send them away? "My wife and I, we wanted children," he said, his voice now a low whisper. "We tried for years, but it never happened. Doctors said it was me." He paused, his gaze fixed on a distant point. "Eleanor, she died of a fever a few years back. The land, it just kept getting drier, and I was alone, just me and the cows." Lily was stunned into silence. She had no words. She had thought of him as a kind man, a generous stranger, but she hadn't considered his own life, his own pain. The loneliness he spoke of was a tangible thing, a ghost in the corners of the room. Jesse stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. "I'm not asking for anything from you, Lily," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm just telling you, I understand what it means to be alone, what it means to have a void in your life." He turned back to face her, his eyes now filled with a raw vulnerability. "You two, you're a couple of kids. The road is no place for you. You can stay here for a while, until your parents send for you." Lily's eyes widened. She had expected a few days' rest, a bit of food, and then a firm goodbye. She had not expected this. "But, sir, we can work, we can help. I can clean, I can tend to the chickens." Jesse held up a hand. "No, no, you don't have to do a thing. This isn't a trade. It's an invitation, a home, for as long as you need it." He looked at her, and she saw the hope in his eyes, a fragile, beautiful thing. "What do you say, Lily? Can you and Thomas stay?" Lily looked at her brother, who was still asleep, his face peaceful. She thought of the long, dusty road, the hunger, the fear. She thought of this warm, safe house, the sound of the windmill, the kindness in Jesse's eyes. It wasn't a question. It was a lifeline. "Yes," she said, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "Yes, please." Life on the ranch settled into a quiet, comfortable rhythm. Lily and Thomas at first were shy and withdrawn, but Jesse's patience was as boundless as the Oklahoma sky. He never pushed them, never asked them to work, and never made them feel like they were a burden. He simply existed, a quiet, reassuring presence in their lives. Mornings began with the lowing of the cattle and the smell of Jesse's strong coffee. He would leave early to tend to the chores, and Lily and Thomas would wake slowly, their bodies finally getting the rest and nourishment they so desperately needed. Lily would help with the small things, like sweeping the floors and helping to wash the dishes, despite Jesse's protests. She felt a need to contribute, to show him that they were worth his kindness. One day, Jesse found her trying to mend a fence with a rusty hammer. He watched her for a moment, a small smile on his face. "Here," he said, taking the hammer from her hand, "let me show you how to do it properly." He was a good teacher, patient and clear in his instructions. He taught her how to swing a hammer, how to mend a fence, how to saddle a horse. Thomas, for his part, loved the animals. He would spend hours in the corral, talking to the cattle as if they were old friends. Jesse showed him how to feed the chickens and collect the eggs, and Thomas's small face would light up with joy. Jesse's life, once a silent, lonely existence, was now filled with the sound of children's laughter. The house, once so quiet, was now a home. He found himself looking forward to coming back to the house at the end of the day, to the sight of Lily and Thomas waiting for him. One evening, as they were eating dinner, a sudden fierce wind began to blow. The windows rattled and the house groaned. Jesse's face grew grim. "Dust storm," he said. "Get away from the windows. It's going to be a bad one." They huddled together in the living room as the storm raged outside. The dust blotted out the sun, and the world outside was a swirling chaos of red-brown. The air in the house grew thick and gritty. Lily was terrified, her heart pounding. Thomas, sensing her fear, whimpered. Jesse put an arm around each of them, pulling them close. "It's all right," he said, his voice a steady comfort. "We're safe in here. It'll pass." And as the storm howled outside, Lily felt a profound sense of peace. She was safe, Thomas was safe, and they were together, a small family in the heart of the storm. The wind could rage all it wanted, but it couldn't touch them. Not here, not with Jesse. Weeks turned into months. The drought continued, but the ranch, thanks to Jesse's tireless work and a small, stubborn well, was a small oasis in the dust-choked land. Lily and Thomas thrived under his care. They were no longer the frail, hungry children he had found on the road. They were healthy, their cheeks rosy, their eyes bright. One day Jesse was working on the roof of the barn, and Lily was helping him, passing him tools. He was distracted, his gaze distant. Lily, who had learned to read his moods, knew something was wrong. "Jesse?" she asked, her voice small. "Are you okay?" He sighed, his gaze distant. "Just thinking," he said. "Eleanor. It would have been her birthday today." Lily didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her, and his eyes were filled with a sadness so deep it took her breath away. "She would have loved you too," he said, his voice rough. "She always wanted a family, more than anything." He looked at the vast, empty sky. I tried to be everything she needed, but I couldn't give her that one thing." The raw pain in his voice was a physical thing. Lily reached out and put her small hand on his. "You gave us a home, Jesse," she said, her voice filled with a conviction that surprised even her. "You gave us a family." He looked at her, a glimmer of tears in his eyes. He didn't say anything, but he squeezed her hand. In that moment, the unspoken pain of his past and the new, fragile hope of their present merged into a single, profound truth. Later that evening, as Thomas was asleep, Jesse and Lily sat on the porch, watching the stars. The sky was a vast, dark canvas, dotted with a million pinpricks of light. It was a beautiful sight, a reminder of the world beyond the dust and despair. "My grandma's farm. It's a long way off," Lily said, her voice barely a whisper. "We wouldn't have made it. We would have died." Jesse was silent for a moment. "It wasn't a coincidence that I found you two," he said finally. "The well, it was running dry. I was going into town to sell the last of the cattle, to get enough money to leave. I was going to abandon this place. I couldn't take the loneliness anymore." Lily's heart lurched. "You were going to leave?" "Yes," he said, "but then I saw you two, and I saw something in your eyes, something that made me remember what it felt like to have a reason to stay." He turned to her, and his face was etched with a profound vulnerability. "You two, you saved this place. You saved me." The words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Lily felt a lump form in her throat. She had thought they were the ones who had been saved. But now she realized they had saved him too. They had given him a purpose, a reason to fight the dust and the despair. They had given him a family to replace the one he had lost. The peace of the ranch was shattered one afternoon by the sound of a sputtering old Ford truck. A plume of dust announced its arrival as it pulled up to the front gate. An elderly couple emerged from the cab, their faces lined with weariness and concern. Lily and Thomas, who were playing a game of catch with a small leather ball, stopped and stared. Jesse, who was working in the barn, came out, his face a mask of polite curiosity. "Afternoon," the man said, his voice raspy. "My name's Henry. This is my wife, Martha. We're looking for our grandchildren, Lily and Thomas." Lily froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. It was her grandparents, the people she had been walking to see all along, but she hadn't seen them in so long. They looked older, more worn down by the years and the drought. Henry looked at her and his eyes widened. "Lily, my God, is that you?" Lily nodded, a lump in her throat. Martha, her grandma, rushed forward and pulled her into a tight, tearful embrace. "Oh, my sweet girl," she sobbed. "We were so worried. We heard you and Thomas left. We've been looking for you everywhere." Lily clung to her grandma, the scent of lavender and old lace a familiar comfort. But a part of her felt a pang of sadness. She had found a home here, a new kind of family. Now that home was in jeopardy. Jesse stood in the background, a silent, unreadable presence. He had known this day would come, but it didn't make it any easier. He had grown to love these children. They were his. "This is Jesse Callahan," Lily said, her voice small. He found us. He saved us." Jesse nodded in greeting. "They're good kids," he said, his voice low. "They've been a big help around here." Henry looked at Jesse, his eyes narrowed with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. "We're so grateful to you, Mr. Callahan," he said. "We've been praying for a miracle." "They're not my grandchildren," Jesse said, his voice suddenly sharp, a hint of steel in his tone. "They're my family." The words hung in the air, a silent challenge. Henry and Martha exchanged a look. The gratitude was still there, but now a new emotion had crept in. Protectiveness. "They're our family too, Mr. Callahan," Henry said, his voice firm. "We've been looking for them, and now we're taking them home. We have a farm and a home for them." Jesse knew he had no legal claim on the children. He had simply taken in 2 strays. But the thought of them leaving, of the house falling silent again, was a physical blow. He looked at Lily, whose eyes were filled with confusion and sadness. She was caught between 2 worlds, 2 families. "They can't go," Thomas suddenly said, his voice a childish protest. "This is our home. Jesse's our family." The simple, honest words hung in the air, a testament to the bond that had formed between them. Henry and Martha were stunned. They had expected grateful, happy children, not children who had found a new life and a new love. The moment was tense, filled with unspoken emotions and the raw truth of the situation. Lily, torn between the family she had lost and the family she had found, felt a profound sense of loss, no matter what choice was made. The air was thick with tension. The grandparents, Henry and Martha, stood by their worn-out truck, their faces a mix of hurt and confusion. Jesse stood his ground on the porch, his quiet determination unwavering. In the middle, Lily and Thomas were caught in a silent struggle. "We don't understand, sweetie," Martha pleaded. "We're your family, your blood." "He gave us food when we were starving," Lily's voice trembled. "He gave us a home when we had nowhere to go. He's family, too." Jesse looked at her, his usual stoicism replaced by a profound sense of pride and love. Henry stepped forward. "We're grateful, Mr. Callahan, but they belong with us. You've done your part." "My part?" Jesse's voice was dangerously low. "My part was to keep them alive, to give them a home. You're talking about taking them back to dust and hunger. Can you even care for them?" The question was a harsh truth they all knew. The grandparents were struggling, their faces gaunt, their clothes worn. A tense silence fell over the ranch. Finally, Henry sighed, his shoulders slumping. "No," he said, his voice a whisper. "We can't. We're struggling too. We had to look for them." He looked at the children with a deep paternal love. "We'll do what's best for them, Martha. And what's best is for them to be here, with him." Martha started to cry, hugging Lily one last time. "Promise you'll visit," she whispered. "I will, Grandma," Lily said, her voice thick with emotion. Henry shook Jesse's hand. "Thank you, son, for everything." Jesse nodded, a quiet acknowledgement. He watched as they got back in the truck, a silent, heartbroken couple, leaving the children they loved behind. As the truck disappeared, Lily felt a profound sense of closure. She had said goodbye to the life she had lost, and was now free to embrace the one she had found. Jesse put an arm around her, and she leaned into him. The ranch was quiet, a new kind of quiet. The silence of a promise fulfilled, of a family finally whole. With their grandparents' visit, a new chapter began. Jesse's care for the children, once temporary, was now permanent. He was officially their guardian, their father. He taught them to read from an old book and do math by counting the cows. He taught them about the land, the weather, and the stars. He was a patient, loving father, a man who had never had his own family, but had a heart big enough for their dreams. Lily, no longer a hungry, frightened girl, grew into a strong, confident young woman. She was her father's right hand, helping with chores, riding horses, and managing the ranch. Thomas, for his part, was a joyful, energetic boy, with a deep love for the animals. His laughter filled the once silent house. The ranch, once a place of despair, was now a place of hope and life. The well, which Jesse had thought would run dry, seemed to hold on, a small miracle. The dust still blew, but now it was a backdrop for a family, for a life lived with love and purpose. One evening on the porch, watching the sunset, Lily turned to Jesse. "My mom and Dad, I think they're in a better place." "I think so too, sweetheart," Jesse said, his heart swelling with pride. "And you," she whispered, "you're my dad." "Aren't you?" Jesse's eyes welled up with tears. "Yes," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I am, and I will love you and Thomas more than anything." He wrapped his arms around them both. In the quiet of the Oklahoma plains, a family was born, a love story written not with words, but with a quiet, unwavering kindness. Years passed. The Dust Bowl gave way to gentle rain, and the land turned green. The ranch flourished, and Jesse became a prosperous, respected rancher. Lily, now 16, was strong and capable. She rode horses with grace and managed the ranch with a keen eye. Thomas was a gentle, kind soul, a man of the land who mirrored his father's quiet strength. One afternoon, a car pulled up. It was Henry and Martha returning to visit. "Lily? Thomas?" Henry said, his voice full of hope. Lily stopped, a mix of emotions on her face. Martha rushed forward and hugged her, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my darling," she sobbed. "You've grown so much." They spent the afternoon talking on the porch. Henry and Martha shared their struggles and small triumphs, while Lily and Thomas talked about their life with Jesse. "We knew we made the right choice," Henry said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You have a good life here, a good father." Jesse shook Henry's hand. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot." "Thank you for everything, Jesse," Martha said, her eyes shining. "You gave our grandchildren a life we couldn't." Before they left, Henry pulled Lily aside. "You're a strong woman, Lily, just like your mother." Lily smiled, her past wounds healed. She was a woman of two families, two loves, and she was whole. As she watched them drive away, she felt a profound sense of peace and a promise to visit, to love, and to never forget. The years flew by. Lily married and had two children, a boy and a girl. They lived on the ranch, and the house was now filled with the laughter of four. Thomas took over the ranch, a true man of the land. He married a school teacher, and they had a daughter. Jesse, now a silver-haired patriarch, sat on the porch watching his family. He had faced the great darkness of the Dust Bowl and the loneliness of his life, but he had found a reason to live, a family to love. He had no biological children, but his family was stronger than blood. One evening, as the sun set, Lily and Thomas sat with him. "We were so scared," Thomas said, "so hungry." "And you," Lily said, her eyes filled with love. "You were just a stranger, and you took us in. You loved us. You saved us." Jesse looked at the strong, beautiful people they had become, reaching for their hands. "I didn't save you," he said, his voice a quiet, profound whisper. "You saved me. You gave me a reason to fight, a reason to live. You gave me a family, and you gave me something worth more than all the gold in the world." The words were a final, perfect truth. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the stars appeared, a silent testament to a man who had done a wild thing. He had opened his heart and found his home. He had created a legacy of kindness, of love, and of an unyielding faith in a single, selfless act.